G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Trewin. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Joel Primus from Naked Revival, based in Vancouver, Canada. Thanks for your time today, Joel.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with how we know each other. Olga from Zoe PR put us in touch earlier this year and thought you'd be a great guest for us.
Well, she's great, and I'm glad she connected us.
Tell the audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Well, I've got a few. Naked Revival just launched last month, and essentially what we do is we curate collections of clothing, lifestyle essentials like candles and journals, alongside supplements, skincare, to help men and soon women put together routines that will take them to the next level, whatever it is they're trying to get to the next level of. Maybe that's physical performance, maybe that's mental performance on a podcast. You know, having been a former runner, I found that routines to get ready for a race, to after the race, to cool down, to get ready for any kind of performance or thing I was trying to do, I had a routine that would transition me into that. And so I wanted to find a way to make that really simple for guys and gals to purchase and implement into their lives, because it's hard. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of various products, and a lot of it's crap. And so we take out the guesswork by curating products, mostly things that I've used over the years, and putting them together. So that's the new business, but it is a revival, also a little bit of an old one.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, yeah, it sounds like a really interesting niche. And you obviously did a lot of research before you launched the business. There's quite a market out there for it.
Absolutely. I mean, we're in that moment, right? We are in the moment where, well, I mean, I think ice baths are up something like 986%.
Holy shit.
It's absolutely insane. I mean, I was ice bathing when I was 13 years old as a runner. People thought I was insane. Now,
I do. Yeah, you never get me in an ice bath.
I was saying this to a friend just the other day. I said, there's nothing that I feel better 5 minutes after that, sex included, than coming out of an ice bath. In the ice bath versus sex, I'm taking all day long. I'm taking sex, but it's people are waking up to how much shit they've been eating, for how much shit they've been consuming, and not just into their bodies, through their eyeballs, etc. And they're realizing that there are a lot better ways to do it that make them feel better, that will give them longevity, and if not longevity of life in the sense that you've extended your life, but in the quality of good years that you have. And so people are determined. You know, I don't think I've met anyone that isn't at least a little bit curious about what can't be uncovered inside themselves or locked inside themselves through tweaks to how they live their life.
I think especially after COVID, that was a real wake-up call for people on their wellness, not just physical, but also their mental wellness as well. A lot of people realizing they didn't want to work for an arsehole boss anymore. And, you know, there was a lot of job movements, etc., and people just wanting a better life overall.
I would agree with you. And, you know, the data was pretty clear on people with comorbidities, including obesity, just how much more it affected them. And so that's true of every kind of illness. And so I mean, people are like, oh, I don't want to be at risk or as at risk, and then take better care of myself. And the better care of ourselves that we take, and the better habits that we create in our 20s and in our 30s, we'll be thankful in our 40s, 50s, and 60s for that, right? Because those habits become ingrained into us, and we itch if we don't get that workout in, or get that plunge in, or have that greens drink, or whatever it is, right? And some of it's placebo, absolutely, but placebo still has a positive mental effect.
Yeah, back on the scary ice baths, I did see that Wim Hof documentary a few years ago, which I found was really fascinating. All the benefits to the body on cold plunging is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I and nobody I know is anywhere near as insane as that guy, but this is what we're talking about a reframe. Like it's as simple as if I can reframe my mindset to do something I don't want to do, because there's not a single morning I actually want to get into that ice bath, go outside and it's 0 degrees and go crack the ice off the tub and jump in. Like, I don't want to do that. I'd rather sit down and have a coffee, first. But if you can change that into a positive mental experience and say, I know that I'm going to be so fucking grateful I did this, and then do it, that extrapolates into not all, but many of the challenging experiences you have in your life. It's not, I'm going to reframe because I know I can, because I do it every damn day or 5 days a week with all of these other things. And so it becomes a life practice that trains your mind as much as it trains your body.
How did you start out?
Well, like I said, I was a runner from the time I was quite young, quite competitive. And so the science was pretty mediocre at that point, but essentially my coach is like, after our workouts, you need to get into an ice bath. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, get into an ice bath. But sure enough, what coach says I would do. So after my workouts, I go upstairs in my house and I'd run a cold tub and I'd go into the freezer and I'd pump whatever was in the ice tray in there. It probably wasn't as cold as I remember it, but I would feel great.
And what about take us through your work life and any other businesses up till now?
Yeah, man. The running led to the business, and it was not, as I'm sure all the wonderful guests on your podcast have accounted for. It's not a straight path, and it's very unexpected. And I had, I had a full ride scholarship to the United States. I'd represented Canada on multiple occasions at the world level, and then I blew up my Achilles. I ruptured my Achilles, and
Well, I've
I
done that too.
wasn't.
Not much fun.
It's something. It's something, right?
Yeah.
Ugh. Now it's an injury that heals, but I was never, for 2 years of struggle and rehab, ever able to regain my form. And in the process, I lost my mind. I was so dark. And it's a process when you're not only frustrated, but you have this sense and loss of identity and power that you once had, because you had everything that you were was wrapped up into this business, or sorry, into this sport. And I couldn't take it. So I ended up saying goodbye to everybody. I hitchhiked across the country. I ended up in Southeast Asia. I became enamored with world travel, and I decided I wanted to make a film about traveling the world. And so I was traveling the world and filming. And then I by the time I got to Peru, I was in desperate need of underwear. And so I ended up buying this gorgeous Pima cotton underwear from a street vendor. And for those who don't know, Peru is known for their exceptional cotton. But the thing was, when I hiked up Machu Picchu wearing the underwear, I didn't love how it performed. And so the wheels started turning in my head. How do I take the comfort that I've just found in Peru, but marry it back to the functionality I was used to as a runner and create something so comfortable you couldn't feel it? And that's where this name Naked came along, Naked Underwear. Now, I guess, I didn't know it, but I was a crazy entrepreneur. And instead of sort of slow growing the business, I got this opportunity to go on a show called Dragon's Den. I don't know if you have Dragon's Den or do you have Shark Tank
Well, I think
down under?
we've got Shark Tank here. When I was living in London, though, I absolutely love watching Dragons Den, the UK version. I haven't seen the Canadian version though.
Yeah, it's the same without the British flair.
Ha!
so so less good, but still good. um, And I think I Googled how to make underwear. I made a few pairs at a local factory that I had found once again on Google, with a local designer that I found through the family. And so I had these 5 pairs, and I'm flying out to Toronto to film this episode of Dragon's Den, where the producers of the show were like, "Hey man, if you want this episode to air, you probably should do the pitch in your underwear." So get there, strip down, and just get my brains blown out by the truth. I didn't have a clue what I was talking about on that show. And it's because I was new to business, but I was sort of a jump, trust the net would catch you kind of guy, and yeah, figure out the problems as they came. And, that was just not the greatest place to try and do that tactic. But the silver lining was one of the dragons said, I think a brand like Naked comes around once in a lifetime, and I'll buy 100% of it. Now, there wasn't 100% of it to buy, as we will get into when we talk about raising money and how you sell equity in your company to do that. But even I knew that. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So her saying that little bit changed the destiny of my life forever, because when the show aired, the phone started ringing, opportunities opened up. I jumped on them. I got in the best stores. And long story short, or at this point, long story long, that little brand that I'd started and went on the show unprepared ended up in every major department store in North America, uplisting onto the NASDAQ, raising initially over $20 million, then divesting to an Australian lingerie company called Bendon, of which it then later became a meme stock alongside GameStop and hit a valuation of over $600 million. So, hey, I guess that's a testament in leaping and the net will catch you, and then sticking with it for 15 years. So that's how I started out in business. And since then I've started other businesses, help entrepreneurs, and Naked Revival is the latest, and one I'm truly excited about.
And so what year did you start the original naked underwear business and how old were you then?
It was '08. I don't
Great
even
time to
remember.
launch a business.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right. I think I had one article on my business deck that talked about how underwear was recession proof, and how everyone still needed it, and then everyone would always make the joke that, yeah, everyone needs underwear during recession because they're shitting their pants. So
Yeah.
I'll take a laugh during a pitch in a dark markets time, but I actually don't believe there's a bad time to start a business. I think that that's all just headlines. And that businesses succeed over the long tail. You might have to adjust how you start your business, or the money that might flow into your business initially. Like we've just been through in Canada two of the worst market years ever. And money trickles down from the top, right? If investors in Canada and traders are not liquid, or as liquid as they like to be, well, that affects all the way down the chain to where and how money is flowing and flows, and what businesses get started, and how risky people are willing to be with their investment bets. And when entrepreneurs get money from investors, they're doing all kinds of great things, and we have a great system. But like I said, just because it's a bad time doesn't mean you don't start a business. You just have to adjust how you do it. Maybe you need another job while you're doing it. There's a whole bunch of variables which we can get into, but it's just something I've come to believe.
And so you started 16 years ago, that business. How old were you then?
I was early 20s, maybe 22, something like that.
Fantastic. And do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business?
Well, I grew the business to a run rate of um, about 12 million before we started to acquire other businesses. And what we did was, so Naked Men's Underwear was doing that, but because when you're a public company, you have this other currency that's not just the cash in your treasury, and that's the liquidity of your stock. And private companies, sometimes, maybe they're in a tough position, or maybe they're in a great position, either might be motivators to say, I'd like to be liquid, or I'd like to get some of my shareholders liquid on their investments. And if we become publicly traded, people can trade in and out of their positions of our company. And so we saw an opportunity to start acquiring little and big businesses using our NASDAQ, like because we were on NASDAQ, and because we had this stock, and because the company had value, future potential value. We put this together, and we started to make some roll ups, and ultimately we ended up getting rolled up into the company out of Australia, which is one of the things I love so much about business. Is there can always be something happening, something exciting that is totally unexpected. And is a great opportunity to chase that can deliver value for shareholders. So that's what we ended up doing. And I learned a lot very fast and in a very painful way, just how all that comes together and how hard it is to be a public company, but also how rewarding it can be when it works.
And so with those acquisitions, what did you get the top line to before were acquired and delisted off the Nasdaq?
Over 100 million.
Wow, that's a lot of underwear.
Well, there's some bras in there, some costumes, some swimsuits, some lounge pants.
Fantastic. And what about number of team members? You started on your own, I'm guessing, and what was the peak number of full-time equivalents?
Before we merged, we had over 20 full time. And then when we merged, there was over 70, which isn't my favorite. I'm actually, I've learned more in love with the romance of a small team doing great things.
Yep, me too. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
Never. Uh, I think that I can recall some certain races I'd been in where I felt like that I was a success after I crossed the finish line. But in business, I mean, you hear me stuttering and pausing. It's because it's a bit of a contemplative topic for me that strikes a chord. I have never let myself feel the satisfaction of having succeeded. If there's something that went well, the postmortem, I'd always go right to the postmortem and see where I messed it and how I could do better. And and if it didn't go well, I beat myself up, and it was all in the desire to do great things for my family, for myself, for my shareholders, but it was also in insecurity and in an inability to know how to enjoy success and to feel a sense of goodness in all of it. And so it's something I'm still learning all these years later is actually how to say, no, 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 I did succeed. That's the honest answer.
Yeah, no, it's good. No, no, I think that's in a lot of our DNA, actually. What does success look like to you?
At this point, I think it looks like wanting what you have, actually wanting what it is that you have, not, you know, continuing to want stuff that you don't have. And if we put that into a business context, that's being satisfied with the things that you're doing in your business and what's happening. And more importantly, yes, financially, it working. But the more I look at it, it's being able to sleep at night with how you've showed up. And I can tell you with the mentors that I've had and the people who wouldn't necessarily call themselves my mentors, but I've had the chance to watch them operate. And even when they make mistakes, they have this resolute, um, maybe it's a stoic acceptance of I did the best I could with the information I had. I gave the best effort I could with the circumstances that I had, and that was enough. And so I attribute that to being okay with what you have and that being the marker for me. Not a high bar, I guess, in some respects.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Don't grow at all costs, even if it is a fast growing business. That one is one I've learned the hard way. And I think actually a lot of businesses post pandemic have started to learn is that having, even though your business is growing fast, it needs to also grow intelligent. Otherwise, it can fall apart. I mean, we just watched Allbirds as one current relevant example that went from a billion to barely 100 million in valuation over a very short period of time. At this date, data might be slightly off with a luggage brand called Away, but they raised 300 and something $1 million to earn 300 and something $1 million in sales. So yeah, $300 million is a nice sales number, but not when you paid $300 million to get it. Casper mattresses is another one. So growing intelligently, and that means spending your marketing dollars more selectively, not just at all costs.
Yep, I agree with that. How did you fund your business? You mentioned obviously the NASDAQ listing, but before then, did you have private investors come on board, or or did you bootstrap on your own to begin with, or had other business partners along the way?
Absolutely. All of the above. All of the above for, this business and other businesses. And it's the fairly normal trajectory, right? Where it starts with a little bit of bootstrapping, usually my own money, then some love money, family, right? Now I've gone both the routes of VC angel as well as quick to IP to a public company, right? The first time we did Naked, after we raised the first seed rounds, after bootstrapped it for a year or so, and then raised a seed round, not much, I don't know, a few $100,000. The Series A ended up being a go public, right? And so for those who don't have a ton of experience with that, it's really early for a low revenue or even pre-revenue company to go public in a consumer sector like I play in. It's not so strange in the mining sector or other sectors where there's so much future potential if you actually strike the vein of gold that people are just betting on that happening, you know. Um, but what I found was that both raising money through the private route with the angels and VCs and the public route were kind of similar. And the only difference in terms of time, um, being out there on the road pitching and doing these endless amounts of road shows, getting in front of rooms, paying money to have your financials and all of these things in your ducks in a row so that people can do quick and effective due diligence on the company. The only difference is that once you became public, you then had to deal with the variability and the unpredictability of your stock and having to do everything in the public eye, which also had its benefits. We can get into that later. But those are the two paths. And then the other two that I've done recently is I've done a Kickstarter and raised $1 million in 30 days, pre-selling products. So it's not selling equity. And I'm about to do a Reg CF, which is a crowdfunding for equity. I don't know if is that something they do in Australia?
Oh yeah, I've been involved in a couple. One in New Zealand, we raised 700 grand at the end of 2018, and early last year, the gin and vodka distillery I've sat on the board of for 4 or 5 years. We raised $2.7 million in 19 hours on a pretty good valuation. So yeah, it's very, very popular over here.
There's so many ways to fund a company these days. Um, that's a great time to be an entrepreneur. you know, that's and 20 years ago, my God, man, it was so much more niche to find capital flowing, and they've just really opened the floodgates, and I really am excited for what potential that brings to future ideas, future products, because people just can get it done.
If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Um, is there a wrong answer to that question? Yeah, I would because I love what I do. If I was doing it for love, which is generally what I do things because I love to do them and I want to do them every day, not because the money is nice or making money is the end objective. It is when you take on shareholders, you have a responsibility, and it's one I take very seriously, but I would do and always chase passion. That said, I've started to find interesting ways of creating my passion in industries that are a little bit more safe, if you will. And so only recently is that answer starting to shift.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Yeah, well, I wrote a blog about this. Um, and the blog is called Dealing with Bankruptcy and Massive Failure. And it outlines a story about this. I can't remember the name of the story. It has to do with a dragon that a boy sees in his house, and his parents sort of deny that it's there. And then the dragon just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I find this to be akin to problems that we don't deal with in our business, where or problems that don't exist at all, and we create a mountain out of a molehill with. And this had to do with one of the companies I was involved with that into insolvency. And the most stressful moment was right before I called the bankruptcy trustee. Because as soon as I called the bankruptcy trustee and I started to get educated, and then I started to get contacts within that sector of restructuring and restructuring debt. And not only did I feel immediately relaxed, but I learned how to solve that. I actually solved that problem because of picking up the phone. And so all that stress I'd created was all in anticipation of something that I had feared and put in this little box of that can never happen to me. And when I faced it, it all went away. There are certainly a lot of others, but that's the first one that came to mind.
Reminds me of one of my favorite Mark Twain quotes. I've had many troubles in my life, some of which actually happened.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
Process. As an entrepreneur, I think in terms of skill set, you are wired to, or at least I am wired. This is not every entrepreneur I've met, uh, to to just shoot from the hip, much like the Dragon's Den experience. And that has worked very well for me. And that has created so many wonderful opportunities. And it has also created so many painful ones. and and so learning how to be a little bit more in process in your business, even in a small business, even in a startup, has added a lot of value because it has saved me some headache and helped me align a business to a much more efficient and profitable path early on. But admittedly, I'm still sort of an addict where it's concerned, and I have to constantly go to meetings to relearn how to not dive back into that behavior because I'm very addicted to it.
Hmm. What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth? I mean, that was phenomenal. How long did it take you to get to the top line of 100 billion? Was it how many years?
5.
5 years. Shit. Wow. Yeah. So what have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
That you don't take time to savor it. Goes back to the point about feeling successful. You know, I had the same thing happen with it, well, I should say inside of that, I missed 2 years of my daughter's life virtually on an airplane going around the world. I I don't regret it in terms of what I did in the business, but I deeply regret it, what it did to my family and what it almost ended up doing to my family. And so these these things happen when there's fast growth, and I didn't find a healthy enough balance inside because there is also no other way than to work your fucking ass off. But you have to find a way to do that and maintain the other things that are important to you. And so I didn't like that. That was a terrible part of the experience.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
It's like raising a kid, man. It's like you get to see this thing that is, in a way, its own living, breathing entity. The idea, the concept, you are nurturing it to become something that can stand on its own, that grows past you and beyond you and can become so meaningful to people and in their own way and however they're going to interact with your brand or your company or your product. And so to every day, both through hard lessons and beautiful moments, get to nurture this thing. Because when it's a small business, you get to be there for all of it, all the moments, right? and and there's something so bloody rewarding about that. Uh, because I've worked and consulted for big companies, and it's really cool, and it's nice to have big budgets, and it's nice to have tons of infrastructure, and it also so sucks to have all that red tape, but you don't feel that same level of intimacy with nurturing this thing that did not exist until you brought it into the world, and to see what it becomes is, man, yeah, it's like having a kid.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
That it that it's not all or nothing. That my self worth is not on the line. That my life is not on the line in the same way that I used to think it was. I used to think that if something didn't work, it was a direct reflection of me. And that if it didn't work, who I was would come crumbling down with it. It kind of harkened back to the running thing where it's like, oh, I'm not a runner, therefore I have to run away around the world. That's changed. Things are much smaller now, even big things.
The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Consistency. It's a game of inches. It's a game of showing up. It's a game of knowing that you're in a sort of practice, if you will, where you're every day you're working it as if you were working a muscle in the gym, and you don't get bigger or stronger without consistency. So keep showing up.
Do you find it difficult to define and execute a clear strategy for your small business? Does your team support your strategy? You know you are ready to create the right environment to boost your team's performance. Our 80-day business transformation program is designed for small business owners like you, with 5 to 30 team members who are ready for growth. Every day, you'll receive a short email with a handful of growth actions. You'll invest 30 minutes each week in your one-on-one coaching session, tackling your specific growth challenges with one of our experienced growth guides, business owners themselves. Boost your confidence, your team's performance, and grow your small business with ease with our business transformation program at growsmallbusiness.com. Can you talk how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
I've been really fortunate to work with incredible people who have made my businesses more successful than I could have alone. And I'd love to say I hired them, but a lot of the time it was my business partner, because I had an issue. I have a lot of faith in people, and I believe in people at face value. And that leads to me being a little bit easily tricked into how somebody's going to show up in the workplace. So that's one component of it, is if you do have a blind spot where hiring is concerned, don't do it yourself. Bring somebody else in to check that person. And the other thing too that I found, because obviously I've still hired a lot of people, is I had tended to, even if I got the hiring right, I would hire somebody who was that I that whose character I liked. And then I began to see that everybody was sort of a similar character type. And that's fine. You can have a good business with people who work hard, who are all sort of people that you tend to like as a person. But then the question got asked to me, and it flipped the script, and it said, well, what if you hired someone that you were uncomfortable with, but they did a fucking amazing job? And the reason that they were so good at their job is because they're a little bit uncomfortable to be around. I think about like just aggressive salespeople for starters, right? Somebody who might even intimidate me, right? And so getting comfortable and learning how to work with people who are diametrically different than me, but add a ton of value to the team, and figuring out how to integrate that and create environments where people don't all have to kind of be alike for it to work, I think can lead to some really interesting accelerated wins inside a company, kind of hacks, if you will, almost, you know. And so that's my advice on hiring.
It's good. And God help any business that has just my type in it. That's for sure.
Well, I've been there, right? So I'm guilty as charged.
What are some of the things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
I'll give you a recent example, because I'm in a startup again, and I've come from exits. And a lot of people that I know and have known for years, who are wonderful, incredible, talented people who have worked in startups. And I've made the mistake that bringing them back into a startup at this stage in their life, when everybody thought, that's a great idea, including them, because it's always a great idea when you're, drinking wine and eating pizza and talking about the business idea. But the reality was, from a culture standpoint, that actually they'd all forgotten how to be in startups, or many of them had forgotten how to be in startups. And so we had this company of 7 or 8 or 9 people at that time, all full time. And 5 or 6 of them just hated the idea that we were a startup. Once it became a reality to them. And I learned that in that moment that culture, really great culture, is ensuring, at least in part, again, we talked about likability and how that being, one component, and then being able to work across from someone who is different than you. But the connecting point is that you're all aligned with the reality of where the business is today and where it's going. When I first moved to New York, and we were still a small company relative to some of the companies our executive team came that was onboarded came from. We had people come from Brooks Brothers and Macy's and Armani, billion-dollar, $100 million, $150 million companies, when we're still much smaller than that. And they didn't realize that they didn't like being part of a mid-stage startup. And it creates a lot of bad culture. And so ensuring that everyone, it's not just like rowing in the right direction, it's knowing what boat they're on, where that, are you river rafting, or are you on still water, right? Because if everybody knows that they're in for a wild ride, you can have a really good culture. And if some of those people are like, shit, I don't want I wanted a leisurely sail, it creates a lot of instability in the boat.
Tell the audience how you've handled balance. You've already commented that you were really out of balance there for a couple of years and missed a lot of your daughter's life. Anything else you want to impart on the audience around balance?
Yeah, I still haven't found it. So two things. One, after the realization with my daughter's life, or missing so much of her life, my one of my very dear friends who happened to be an investor in the company, just coincidentally, he died, and he was my age, and he had two daughters that were similar to my daughter's ages. And he died of a heart condition that I didn't even know he had. And we traveled part of the world together. And it was devastating for me. And it woke me up. And I was fortunate enough that that happened around the time that I was transitioning out of the business, because it had sold to the Australian company. And so I was able to travel the world with my girls and move to a farm. However, I have found that the tendency to, as a workaholic, to not leave. I hope I wasn't offensive, but I made the quip about being an addict, and that's how I feel. I feel addicted to work and success to a point in which I have a very hard time pulling away. And so I create, I try and create a framework that at least I can stick to most of the time. And this framework usually involves meals with my family, movie nights. Um, it involves the gym. It involves things that force me, because otherwise I will sit here and I will go do 100 more emails after our podcast. Even we're doing it at night, my time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got the same affliction. I have to put things in place, like taking my chocolate Labrador for a walk every day and catching up with mates, playing sport. Otherwise, yeah, I just like same. I love what I do, and I've got that addiction as well, I think.
That's the challenge. That is the unfair reality and balance that and trade-off that an entrepreneur makes. Because a lot of us, we might be addicted to it, and we might be a little bit have an unhealthy relationship with success, or what it is, this never turning it off thing. But if you also love what you do, what could be more rewarding every day than getting up? I don't know you, and I'm doing a lot of the talking, but I'm loving this interaction. And as you would well know, you've been involved in, I think I read, 6 or 7 companies, all different types of companies. You've consulted for like 25, that's as an equity holder, consulted for like 25 companies. And there's so much fulfillment that you get to have in those types of situations and projects that you found yourself
Mm, absolutely. How much professional development have you invested in yourself?
in nonstop. Nonstop. And this goes back to, running and growing up with coaches. When you have a coach is always coaching you. And so that just was a very natural transition for me to be a fierce reader, uh, listen to podcasts, read, call up mentors. I've had coaches. It's just nonstop.
That's good. Yeah, well, that was the next question. You've had mentors or coaches. Did you have, I assume you had a board of directors, obviously, if you were NASDAQ listed. What was your experience with working with the board?
Well, I'll say the same thing and I'll answer the mentor question with it. There are different mentors and coaches for different stages of your business growth. And the same applies to board of directors and advisors, because much like the New York experience I shared, where just because somebody's got the resume and just because they're willing to take the job does not mean they're the right person for that job. And there are people who have worked for Fortune 50 companies who get startups and they'd be a great person on your board. And there are people who work for those who just don't, they just can't. And so my experience with boards and advisors has been very mixed. On one hand, I've given away millions of shares and options and warrants to advisors and directors who didn't lift a finger. And you know what? To an extent, I understand it in retrospect because I've learned that they didn't know that they were supposed to. That was not, it was a different, they'd grown up in a different world, and yeah, they had to sign off on the end, this and that and review the CEO, but it wasn't an active thing. And I've had some that have become my best friends and have been with me through the darkest times. And I'm so grateful. And so if you're in a small business and you're growing and you do have the opportunity to bring on a director who wants to be in the muck with you, you won't regret it.
Yeah, good advice. Now, Joel, you're one of the few we've had on that's exited a business, or a few. Any advice for the audience on maybe thinking of exiting one day?
Read my book. No, I'm not kidding.
Good.
I do talk about it in my book, Getting Naked, the bare necessities of entrepreneurship and startups, um, which was a reflection both personally and a sort of a tutorial professionally on going through the life cycle of a business. But you know, I'm gonna answer this question a few ways. Don't build your business to sell it, in the sense of growing ahead of yourself so that you can create so much value that somebody's going to pay a multiple of that value and buy you out. Build your business sustainably, and that will happen anyway. Um, and if you love what you do, this is where it gets really hard, because over time, I have more and more become a believer in, if there's an offer and it's good, take it.
Mm.
And if you're ready to take it because you've maintained your books properly, you have, you've made, even if you're not public, you've done a good job keeping your books in order. You have a great DD suite. Your contracts are in order. The business is organized, and it makes it really easy to take advantage of a quick opportunity, or of an opportunity, much more quickly than if none of that stuff's in order and you're 2 years on your, because I've seen it. I mean, our transaction with the Australian company took a year, and we're public, so we're fairly organized. Um, I've seen them take 2 years just because people aren't organized and deals can fall apart. But with unpredictable markets and how fast things can change, if you have a chance to get liquid, and there's so many wonderful, exciting things you can continue to do in the business world, I would say take it. Take it, put a little aside, and go do it again. That's my advice now. But be ready. Always be ready for that if you can.
Yeah, that's another good point. I assume you've read John Morillow's Built to Sell book?
I read Built to Last. That's not John? That's not the same author,
No, that's
right?
Jim Collins. No, John, we've had John on our podcast a couple of times. Great book. And again, there's probably three or four books in my top 10 now that I only discovered. Then these books have been around decades, some 30 years. I only discovered from guests on the cast over the last 4.5 years. And Built to Sell is one of those books. It's amazing. John's also a Canadian. I think he's based around Toronto, but I'll
Mhm.
shoot you through those books. You might be interested. So it's Built to Sell, The Art of Selling a Business, The Automatic Customer, and his weekly podcast is awesome as well. So he has guests on there that have obviously exited. You hear about all the mistakes they made, not just legally, but just, getting the business ready. But he's exactly that. He says most people aren't prepared when they're approached, so they don't get as much value as what they could have if they have had their shit in one sock.
That's a great point. And one of my business partners, former business partners, he owns a business that is in the business of being ready to sell because by the nature of who they are. But he said recently, last week, he had 5 offers to buy his business. He went to a conference and I said, well, were you pitching? And he said, no. He said, as soon as he stopped trying to sell his business, but he kept in the communities and he said it was about swagger. It was about a sort of, I don't actually need to sell my business. I don't care. And we're talking about, when somebody smells blood in the water, if there's desperation, things get harder to do. Um, I also have routinely aligned myself early with M&A advisors. So people who are in the business of selling businesses. And they're just people it's not that I've brought them on in a formal capacity because their retainers are often obscene and offensive,
Yep.
even before they've sold your business. I won't tell you what I've paid in the past, but uh, believe you me, they're salesmen and women at their heart. And so if you just keep them abreast with a yearly dinner or a bi-yearly whatever dinner or coffee, and you just plant those seeds, they'll talk and things can happen. So just keep that as part of your thing, but don't be selling is the point. You're
Yep.
just friendly updates.
Well, as John says on his cast, businesses are bought, not sold.
Hmm.
And we'll link through to your book in the show notes as well so people can check that out. All right, Joel, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Have you read The Hardest Thing About Hard Things? Ben
Ben
Horowitz.
Horowitz. Oh, I've told this story a few times on the podcast, but I distinctly remember because I was listening to that book as I was running around Christchurch in New Zealand, and I had to stop because I was pissing myself laughing. That line you may remember: "If you've got to eat shit, don't nibble."
I mean, that's the point, man. It's fucking hard, and that's the hardest thing about growing a small
Yeah,
business.
that's it. Favorite business book would just help you the most?
uh, Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel. It's not. I mean, that's hybrid business slash investing and life philosophy. It's good. It's good. He's good.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Not tools. I'm a notes kind of guy, Apple Notes, paper. But I think Chris Williams, Modern Wisdom Podcast, How I Made My First Million. Um, Chris Williams is really good because let's stay on him, linger on him because he's good business people on the podcast, but he also was really dialed into culture. Um, and I think it's really important for CEOs to have a good ear to the ground of what's happening. And I think he does a great way. Plus, there's a lot of self-help coaching type stuff in there. So I'm enjoying him recently. But How I Made My First Million is interesting. And if you have kids, uh, Business Wars where they're like stories and there's like Taylor Swift versus Scooter Braun or North Face versus Patagonia or Louis Vuitton versus Gucci. And the kids generally like them. But you get
Hmm.
Disney versus Pixar. Oh, so good.
Oh wow, I'm adding that to my
Yeah.
list now for my daughter,
Yeah.
my 11-year-old daughter and I to listen to.
Yeah.
One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
Uh, just develop. I'm going to cheat. Develop a framework. So this isn't a tool per se, but you could put that framework into Google Sheets, and inside of it, you have your non-negotiables, your things that you're going to do most days. I think every day is tough, but most days. And those things have to progress your mind. They have to help you keep sane and balanced. They have to help progress your professional capabilities and also, and most importantly, advance deep work, which is something that I think is lost and harder to hold on to in our in our ever connected world where we're just getting pings and dings and emails and this and that, phone calls all day long, and deep work. Cal Newport,
Yeah,
great
great
book.
book. Awesome book. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And it's such a travesty, our society these days. I mean, I remember I wrote about this in one of our courses. You would have remembered the Microsoft Office, and would have been, I don't know, 15 years ago. They released an update, and by default, they turned on that fucking email toaster thing. Pops up in the bottom right corner. Hey, here's an email. Why don't you just distract you from whatever you were doing? So yeah, it's just like all the distractions that we have available to us. And yeah, it takes real discipline. That is an awesome book. That's in my top 10, Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Yeah. Awesome. Respect. Truth.
Finally, my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out 15 years ago?
Slow down and enjoy it. You chose this, you idiot. Slow down and enjoy it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today, Joel. I've really enjoyed our chat. Congratulations to you and the team on the growth over the years, and good luck with Naked Revival, which is just launched last month. And look forward to catching up in the future to hear how it's gone.
As do I, and look forward to coming down under and visiting you in beautiful Tasmania.
Yeah, I'll send you my document on Tasmania that might entice you out here.
I'm, I'm willing to be sold. I'm willing to buy, not be sold.
Good one. And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.